Hi all, I have another absolutely amazing game of Leela Chess to show you. It's against the Ethereal chess engine, which is a TSEC premier level engine now. It had great promotions in the TSEC League. So this is in the Chess.com Blitz Battle tournament, separate tournament, 5 minutes with a 2-second increment. Ethereal version 11 playing white against Leela. So let's see, e4. We have the Sicilian Defence, knight f3, d6, and Ethereal chooses the positional bishop b5 check. So this is less tactical than the open Sicilian. So it's an interesting choice, and maybe it's in Leela's favour, this more positional opening rather than the open Sicilian. White castles, a6, and the bishop just drops back. So it's been treated a bit, you might think, strangely here. Knight g f6, d3, a bit quietly from white, a bit timid. This bishop is not that aggressive here. It's a modest pawn chain. Okay, we have e6, a4, b6, and now bishop f4, bishop e7, knight fd2, bishop b7. So black seems absolutely fine. The pieces seem quite well placed. Bishop g3, and here things get a little bit interesting. Leela actually plays b5 here, so stretching out on the queen side before even castling. White now plays f4. Now this is interesting, especially if black castles kingside. You can see that there's attacking prospects maybe building up later after f5. However, let's have a look at some alternatives here. What would happen if a takes, rook takes? This position isn't b5 an issue. It turns out here, for example, queen a6 is sufficient. After d4, c4 shields again the pawns, and actually black ends up doing quite well in this kind of continuation. Black would have a small edge here. So yeah, it seems as though a takes is not offering too much to white. So we have f4, and now knight b6, again with an invitation to swap off rooks. White actually declines by closing the queenside with a5. Now that is actually an interesting decision for black's potential king safety, believe it or not. Let's have a look at a takes again here, just to check this position with knight a3. Queen d7 seems sufficient here. Black's quite comfortable there. So a5, does it have a downside, a long-term downside? The thing is, black hasn't committed to castling yet on the king side. Maybe black's later going to castle the queen side if the queen moves somewhere, say c7. And in which case, this file, it's not opened, it's closed. It's kind of a safe territory for black's king, potentially, on the queen side. We have bishop f3. And it looks as though e5 might be of interest to white, especially given that there's natural support with the bishop on g3. So maybe e5 is on the cards. Leela actually stops that and kind of hems in this bishop. And we have f5 closing even the center, releasing the central tension now. So two tensions have been released by these two pawn moves. So is this in white's favor or black's favor? If we tried f takes e5, it seems knight takes is perfectly okay for black. For example, taking, black has no real issues here. In this kind of scenario, it seems as though even black might even consider playing for f5. My analysis indicates this, and this kind of thing is very dangerous with the f file potentially. This is just an illustration of f file dynamic and other dynamics coming to bear on white's position. So yeah, there's some interesting scenarios which could emerge on f takes, but they seem perfectly okay for black. So we have this closing on this side of the board as well, and now g5, very, very aggressive play on the king side again, with the king in the center not committed yet. Extremely interesting. What if white didn't play f takes en passant? If this did happen, of course it activates the rook. And let's, for example, see knight c3, king f8. This continuation seems perfectly nice for for black. There's an active rook attacking rook, and black should actually have a small edge here with the bishop pair and active rook bearing down. This seems as though black's got a great position. There isn't too much to worry about. So anyway, knight, it was ignored. Knight c3, just ignoring that g5. h5, super aggressive stuff from Leela. This is really a distinguishing feature of Leela. No other engine would usually play this aggressively with the black pieces. Bishop f2, g4, so gaining space. Queen c7, preparing to castle queenside. It's everything an over-the-board player, if he or she was really keen to win with black, might consider casting opposite sides. But black's benefiting from this closure, this releasing of tension with these pawns on f5 and a5 here. It's more difficult for white to just peel black open. So castling queenside, the king, seems very, very safe here. Bishop g3. We have the king moving to b8 here. Bishop h4. It seems as though white's already stuck. You know, this kind of move and this move. It seems to be a bit of a time waste. Rook dg8. We have knight d1, and now white might be threatening rather c4 to at least stop black playing d5. Now Leela pounces on the possibility of d5 to try and liberate this bishop on this diagonal, try and open up this diagonal. Yeah, if we look at king a8, c4, white's probably slightly better actually. So d5, c4 now is played. It's interesting. This is dangerous actually for white. If c4 isn't played, if king h1, then black might actually play c4. For example, if say a token just to see what black's doing here. I wanted to see what black was doing in this kind of disaster scenario, for example. But let's say c3, then there's things like knight c5, and you can look at this pawn chain under great scrutiny. There's great pressure on white's pawn chain here in this position. Yeah, it's huge central pressure being reinforced by this bishop on b7. And it all bears down potentially to white's king as well on g2. But there is a blockade at the moment on h4. But this looks very, very promising. For example, knight f2. Knight f takes e4 is a tactical possibility. Hitting the bishop and then taking now check. This is very strong for black if white doesn't play carefully. So c4, b takes, and now we have e takes. You might wonder, what about d takes? D takes gives black a protected passed pawn in the center. Okay, you might think there's a blockade square here for this pawn. Let's have a look. Bishop d3, for example. This position seems comfortable enough for black. As an example, black can still progress quite a vicious kingside attack. This is just an example variation where even this is a possibility, h3 here, and then crashing through with g2 check. So these are quite disastrous scenarios for white on d takes c4. But in the game we have e takes d5. So this bishop now is given scope, and also there's a challenge being made on this bishop on h4 now, after that knight move, unveiling this bishop here. So bishop takes e7. Yeah, on bishop, the knight's also threatening knight f4, which coordinates the bishop and knight on g2. Yeah, that is really a good target in this position. So let's have a look here. So if the bishop had retreated, then knight f4. If bishop g3, then there's possibly h3 to consider. h4 and h3. The bishop's been pushed back. There's also other things like knight e3 anyway. So yeah, it looks too dangerous. So say white wants to protect e. Now e3 is covered by the knight in any case. So bishop g3, I believe the main issue is h4. But let's have a look at bishop f2. Knight f4 is too dangerous. This position, there's actually c takes d3, for example, crashing through. This is just far too dangerous. Look at all of this piece coordination. And if black ever weakens this diagonal, then this is really embarrassing, this kind of thing. Just winning a rook there, for example. Total disaster. So knight takes d5. We have bishop takes e7. Knight takes. So the bishop's been really liberated on the diagonal, and there's still pawn play possible. We have knight takes h4. So knight c3. Knight f6. Bishop d1 does expose pressure on e5. Has black overstepped the mark here in some way? Because actually, structurally, this one looks a bit vulnerable, maybe even this one. Leela just protects first e5. Now, knight a4 hitting the c5 pawn, but now a really clever response is played to this. Knight d4. Really, really, really clever. Trying to, yeah, there's tactics coming about here with the bishop and rook in some variations. But before we get into knight a4 totally, on queen e3 there seems to be sufficient play with knight b4 here, counterattacking that d3 pawn here. So for example, this take on d3, black ends up being better. This nice tactics are available here on g2. It's just too dangerous to take on d3. So say h3, then this scenario is really pleasant for black. So yeah, knight a4 hitting c5, and also e5 is vulnerable, of course, as well at the moment, but the knight and queen protecting at the moment. Knight d4 though, isn't there a weakness of the last move, the e5 pawn? We have queen takes e5. On, let's say, rook b1, then black gets on with weakening the whole diagonal with h3, teasing open the light square weaknesses. For example, g3, queen c6, threatening queen g2, mate. So here, check, king a8, allowing knight b6 check, because if king a7, then queen takes c5 check, gets rid of the queens, and white will be winning. But here, unfortunately, king a8 for white. This is really strong. White would end up having to give up a piece, because if rook f2, then there's just queen h1 checkmate. So these variations are all really quite dangerous. So to allow h3 is not a good idea. So queen takes e5. But now, what's Leela's idea, do you think? If I give you 5 seconds to pause the video, what would you play with black? Okay, knight f3 check. It's liberating this rook potentially. White took with the bishop. If taken with the pawn, then this is just really dangerous. G takes f3 check, and say king f2, then there's knight g4, winning the queen here with this fork. So that's pretty crushing. And if we look at king h1, then f2 check, and this is just lethal. So for example here, it's not good, checkmating. So knight f3 check, bishop takes, g takes. We have rook f2. Yeah, on queen takes c7, this is also interesting to consider. For example here, it seems black ends up better in these lines with the coordination on g2. It's very, very strong. This ending scenario, for example, is very strong for black. So we have rook f2, and now knight g4, forking queen and rook, so basically forcing white's hand to take the queen here. King takes, and now g takes is played. We have knight e5 check, so not taking the rook on f2, but knight e5 check. Rook g2. There is an interesting alternative in king f1. You can see these variations in the pinned comment of this video. It seems as though black gets the upper hand with very accurate play here, with knight takes f3. For example, rook takes, bishop takes, knight takes. And here, this position, black has to play extremely accurately with king b7. Check, and now king c6. Not king a7 here, because then white's exchange sacrifice is fantastic after rook e1. These knights and the rook are really crashing through, and the pawn to white's king. Yeah, the knights are just a menace. For example, this is a really good line for white. After check, check, f6, and then what white actually gets to checkmate black in most of the variations, for example, like that. So it requires precision, but in this scenario, king c6, there's knight e5 check. This is potentially a good position for black. Black, the exchange up with very, very accurate play should be winning this potentially. This is just a very, very accurate long line. So, but this is a major alternative to check out in this game. Just king f1. It's major to check out king f1 here. So rook g2 was played, though that was played instead. We have knight takes f3 check, king f2, and now knight g5. So hitting the rook, and yeah, if for example rook g1, let's have a look. Then there's things like knight h3 check. That's just vicious. So white actually sacks the exchange here with rook takes g5. Yeah, very, very dangerous position. So rook takes g5. Is there enough for this exchange sack? Knight f3 protecting f5. And it looks as though c5 is vulnerable as well. But h3 now. Just offering c5. And the really infiltrating rook h4. So this h3 supported this rook h4, which now supports rook f2, which in some lines would support bishop f3, which would then, say, after this, support other things. So it all gets really dangerous now. Here we have king e2. Let's have a look, for example, the king. When is the king's step there? If rook b1, for example, check, and here is good actually to get this scenario. For example, this is too dangerous. That's absolutely winning. And if, yeah, it's some very interesting scenarios for black basically on rook b1. And there's also, let's say, check here, king d2. This scenario, black's got a small edge, but yeah, it does look scary. There's a lot of technical stuff going on, as you'd expect. But okay, we have king e2, rook f4, rook f1, offering the exchange of rook. So still the exchange down, and white's wanting some simplification. There are 2 pawns for the exchange at the moment. So black has 3, 1, 2, 3, white 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But you'll note that 3 of these are separate pawn islands. Okay, so they're slightly weakened by not protecting each other. King takes, rook g8, king e2, rook d8, knight b3, and the king comes up as if to go to b5, and then maybe to b4 to kick this knight away, and then to take here. So dangerous. The king is an aggressive piece. Knight g4. If, for example, d4, then yeah, king b5, and here is nice for black. So knight g4, king b5, the king gets aggressive. The bishop really wants to come and protect this, but first the check is played, and then protecting to keep this active threat alive without losing the h-pawn. So knight g4, king b4. So yeah, material is increasing now for black. Only 1 pawn for the exchange. Knight h6, the bishop comes to protect f7. So f7 now protected adequately. Knight g4, the king comes to b4. Now rook d8, a5, bishop drops back. King c5, pressing rook takes d4. The king comes over here now. This pawn is now vulnerable. Yep, this is going to be almost like a pure exchange up. But knight takes a5. Rook takes d3. Bishop d5 cuts this knight. Sort of restricts this, dominates this knight now in this position. So a very nice centralizing move. Rook a3. Okay, rook a4. Taking on b4. Yeah, this knight's kind of paralyzed here. And now, yeah, this pawn is taken. Bishop e4, yeah, it's all over Bond shouting now. After bishop takes d3, white's losing further material. If knight takes d3, then check just wins that knight. So, yep, this is just absolutely winning now. It's just, obviously, it's a rook up. But we're playing to the death. Let's see how Leela's technique is now. It's the right colour bishop for the h-pawn. Anyway, the king's far too far. Checkmate here. Yeah, so quite a crushing game with the black pieces. And shows how, aggressive Leela's play can be. She seemed to close the position up on the queenside as a prelude to castling queenside, which is a really clever idea, actually. To play on the queenside, to try and lock it down, and then, creating a safer haven in advance. And then opening up lines, trying to open up lines on the other side of the board. It's very reminiscent to me of Petrosian. Sometimes in the French defence, he would castle queenside and open up lines on the Kingside. There's a very famous game against Boris Spassky on the channel. Maybe I'll put a link in the pinned comment somewhere for that. You can see it's almost Petrosian-esque style of play with the black pieces for some of the games which Petrosian won brilliantly. So, yeah, I hope you got something from it. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks so much.